What if getting what you want isn't about understanding yourself, but understanding what is important to the other side? Stay right where you are. Welcome to How to Get What You Want. This podcast is for driven women ready to claim their goals and navigate their careers with clarity and confidence. Join me as we explore real stories, tools, and strategies to help you steer your career exactly where you want to go. Let's get started on helping you get what you want. Hey, welcome. I am so happy that you made the choice to be here today. We have another great topic to discuss, all about understanding the other side of the table. And what's really interesting about this concept is we say it, but it can be really hard in high stakes situations to really consider what's important to the other party because we're so in our head about what we want, what we need to do to make the shift to the other side, to the other person, and understand what they're needing, what's important to them is a differentiator. In fact, Harvard has said, I feel like I quote Harvard all the time. Harvard's research shows that mutual understanding results in better long term agreements and higher satisfaction for both parties. Taking versus empathy research shows that those who seek to understand their counterparts' emotions and motivations reach better deals than those that rely on logic alone. When I did go to Harvard, they had told us that when you consider the interests of the other party for 30 seconds before you walk in, and I tell this a lot of times to people, they have seen measurably better results in the groups that do that. Just 30 seconds to consider what is important to the other side. Even doing that for a shift allows you to see it from the other side. It's interesting that we don't take time to do that. And it is because it's so important to us that we're just considering ourselves. And it makes us a little bit nervous or it makes us a lot nervous to consider what's important to them because it takes away from our argument. And so often when we think about negotiators, the myth is that you have to persuade, you have to be tough, you have to be all these things on this side of the table. But the truth is, really having an understanding of what they're needing is so powerful. You can illustrate to them that you understand that, and that breaks open collaboration and creativity. When people feel heard, when they feel seen, when they feel understood, they're more likely to give from their side too. So, really great negotiators focus on understanding how they can persuade the other side. And that's based on what's really important to them. It isn't about being soft. And sometimes when we understand the other side, it inhibits us because we know they're going to react negatively to this ask, or we understand too much to make a really bold position. There are things that we do get in our way when we understand the other side, but it's about moving through those and even having the realization that you may get a little bit of friction and understanding that that's coming can help you adapt and stay in your position longer because you have anticipated what their reaction's going to be. So it can be a superpower. It can also be something that you have to be aware of because the emotions that come from the other side can inhibit you. It can make you retreat a little bit, can make you feel different feelings than you anticipated. And when you're not anticipating that kind of response and you're surprised by something that triggers you, that can cloud your ability to think things through. So, empathy is a really important factor and it can also get in your way. But it's more important to take the lens of digging deep to understand what's important to them. And it's really about the position of the deal, but also the nuances around it. Like what's important to them right now? How is this going to make them look? What politics are they facing that this will impact? It's considering a lot of questions to understand their full perspective of not just the deal, but how it will impact them as a leader, as an executive within the organization. It's even thinking about if they have to persuade to move it forward, what evidence or what things can you give them to make their position stronger? Thinking about how are you gonna position this discussion in a way that they understand you see them, you've taken time for it, and then anticipating what do they need? What facts do they need? What data do they need? How do you need to talk to them about the situation? How do you frame it up? All of those things will give you more strength in your position because you've anticipated what the other side needs to hear and how they need to hear it so that they can get on board with you. I'll give you some examples. Stories help us to really put this in place to help us really understand. So I have a couple that I want to share with you. Hey, Susie here. Thought I'd pop in. I wanted to let you know I've been an executive coach for over a decade. I work with executives and they call me their silent partner because I help them increase their confidence when they're facing really difficult decisions. If you'd like to see if we're a good fit, head over to susietalmanchuck.com and fill out an application. I'd love to hear from you. This whole idea of empathy reminds me of this kind of like negotiation 101 where they talk about, can you sell me this pen? And most people, what they do is they talk about the attributes of the pen. It works really well. It has black ink. It can write for days, all the things that are important to it. But really the key to answering that question is what questions you're going to ask the other side to unpack why they need the pen. And that's really the right answer. Questions do you need to ask the other side to understand their position? Just asking questions and letting the other person answer, you are able to show them that you see them. Even that act of practicing empathy is really powerful, and that's the secret. If anybody ever asks you to sell them a pen, that's the answer, is not to focus on the pen, but focus on what are the needs of the other side. It reminds me of, when I worked with Dan. Dan was my colleague that we didn't have a lot of respect for one another because we didn't have a deep level of trust, but he did some things that I thought were really interesting and funny. One time, he was negotiating with a client, and it was the CEO, he was in the CEO's office, and behind the CEO was all of their mission statements and all of this information about the company. And so what Dan did is as he was pitching to him, he was lifting some of the words and using the language the organization used, and he got the deal. And it was because that person felt like, wow, he really understands us. He gets us. That would feel inauthentic to me because I would feel like that person in that seat would know that I was reading the words behind him. But Dan did it in a way that that person didn't. They didn't see that he had done that. He didn't feel manipulated. Sometimes when we understand the other side, it may feel like we are manipulating them, but it's really got to reframe that for yourself. It's understanding what they need. It's framing it in a way that makes sense to where they sit, what they need, how important it is to them. I worked with a client a few weeks ago who was really struggling because she had applied for a position internally and she hadn't gotten it. And she was so focused on, I have all this experience around operations. I've been a leader for X amount of years. All of these things on her list of why she was the best candidate for the position. And I then talked to the person that made the decision about the role, and he was saying they need somebody that was sales oriented, that had a great, strong network of people they could reach out to. And those were the attributes of the role that they were filling. And it was really interesting to me that she had completely missed the boat on what was important to the interviewer that was filling the role. He really needs somebody that was outward thinking that was very sales oriented, that was very proactive. And she, on the other side, was really good at what she did. She was a really good leader, but she was more operational and more internally focused. And so the questions that she answered came from her position. I know that people get in their head about, I need to show up like this. This is what my value and what my strengths are. And that is really important. But you need to reorient yourself to think about what is important to them. How do I need to present this to them? How do I show and illustrate that I'm the right person for this role based on what's important to the person that's sitting in front of me? And just repositioning your key attributes in that way will help the other person understand that you get what they need. It's such a subtle shift, but it's interesting because when an outcome is really important to us, we get focused so intently around what we bring and why we're the best and what we want to prove to them about us. It makes it harder for us to zoom out and shift and think about what is important to them. How do I need to present this? And even she didn't think about the dynamics and the politics that went with him positioning this role, this promotion that she wanted. The other aspect that was really important to him is they wanted to see somebody doing it differently. The perception of her is she likes to do it the way she feels comfortable. So if she was able to position it to him that this is how she was going to think differently. This is how she was going to look at this role differently and approach it differently. She didn't do that. So he had to say no. And she still doesn't understand why, even though he told her, because she still really focused on what she brought to the table and why she was the best candidate. So sometimes getting out of our own way is what will create the position, the frame to the other side of the value that we bring. You have to be intentional at first, but the more you practice it, that allows you to understand it more deeply so you can give them what they need to say yes. As I give you a few tips, I want you to think about a high stakes situation that's coming up for you. That's going to be a one on one, and it doesn't need to be asking for more money, a promotion. Maybe it's just facing somebody that makes you a little bit nervous or that you don't know and you're presenting something new. I want you to think about applying this to a situation that is in your near future, thinking about what you're going to do to move through it with these tips. So the first one is really framing. How are you going to come out in this conversation to help them understand that you saw it from their perspective, that you do have empathy, but also have a very strong frame? Your frame could be, I'm really excited that we have this time together today. My goal is this. And I know what's really important to you is that we consider A, B, and C. Is that right? Are those the things that you want to discuss as we move through this? And do you agree that the goal here will be that we have an agreement of X, Y, and Z? So framing it in a way that you have considered what's important to them of how you're going to frame it out. The other way you can do it too is to really think about if they're data driven, how do you frame it that, I'm going to ask you for this and I wanted to tell you a little bit of backup around how I got to this. So you kind of show them your math. So considering like not only their interest in the situation, but also how do they like to receive information? How do they like to understand? How will they best see your perspective? And how do you frame that up really well for them? It's important to set the momentum in a positive way. And when you do frame it up so that they know that you've considered what's important to them, that puts you in a really great place to gain momentum. The second tip is to ask more and assume less. The thing that's tricky about a high stakes situation is when we know it's going to be high stakes for us, we've done a lot of preparation. We know a lot. So we tend to want to show that we know a lot and we want to just prove it because we did all this homework. But what's really powerful is to ask more questions and don't assume the answers. Really listen in the moment to understand. You're listening to make sure that you don't jump right in again. When people make a point, you jump right in, they feel like they're not heard. So if they repeat themselves, it may be because they don't feel like you understand them. It isn't because they're trying to reiterate a point. They're saying, I don't think you're listening well. So don't assume and ask a lot of open ended questions. Great open ended questions are 7 words or less, and asking one question at a time is key. This is something that's really challenging for me to ask one question at a time, but it's powerful because it allows you to go back and forth and not overwhelm them. The last tip is to listen to what's not being said. Allow yourself to be a really great observer. Are they frustrated? What are their nonverbals saying? Are they closed off? Do they have their arms crossed in front of them? Are they pausing? If you know them well, you can anticipate those emotions. You don't want to label them and say, why are you so mad? Or why are you so quiet? But you want to say, hey, I'm sensing that you need some more information from me. What would be helpful for you to understand? And try to pull them out. If you're sensing some negative nonverbals, how can you pull them back into the situation? The last thing you want them to do is to become emotional in a negative way because that inhibits their thinking. And when people are inhibited, they focus on their own interests and they're not as interested in what's important to you. And you definitely don't want that to happen. So the 3 tips are reframing and framing really strongly when you go in to illustrate that you have empathy for their side, that you understand what's important to them, and you're getting their buy-in through how you frame up the conversation. The second one is ask more, assume less. Even if you know so much, allow yourself to ask really good questions and make sure you are sitting there really listening to understand. And then watch the nonverbals. What's not being said? What are you noticing? What are you sensing? Those can be a clear indication of where the conversation's going. And be careful how you call them out. You want to do it in a way that's not going to make it them more defensive or pull back more. But how do you get them to open up? What do you need to do? Even if you need to take a break, if you're sensing that there's some apprehension through their nonverbals, what are you going to do? So important to consider, how are you going to use these? How are you going to leverage these in that situation that you thought about in your own mind? How can you frame it, ask questions, and make sure that you're really taking time to pay attention to what's going on that aren't the words that are coming out, but are the nonverbals? Having empathy for the other side can feel overwhelming. It does, because we want to be really strong in our position. So considering what's important to them is challenging and hard. So reflect on something that's happened to you, a high stake situation, a negotiation. Did you focus more on what you wanted or what the other party needed? What you wanted or what they needed? We miss so often when we don't have a balance of both. We need to understand what we need, but we also need to know what to deliver to help them feel good about the outcome. Negotiation isn't about a win lose. That's really old school. It's about a win win. It doesn't have to be equal, but both parties need to leave feeling satisfied. And the way to do that is to have empathy for the other side. So when you think back on, again, did you focus more on what they wanted, on what you wanted, or what the other party needed? How could you have shifted that approach to change the outcome? What about that situation, when we look back, hindsight is 2020, we definitely know more about what was important to that person. What did we miss? Those are the best ways to get better, by looking back and being really curious to understand what you could have done differently to understand their needs. This one's a tough one for me. I feel like I don't spend enough time really understanding the needs of others, but when I have, It has been the strongest position that I've had. And so I know that it's worth the time and effort and the space to make sure that you understand what is important to them from all aspects, especially when the outcome is really important to you. It's not just a focus on you, but what do you need to deliver to make them feel like you understand? If you love this podcast, my newsletter goes a little bit deeper. And every week I send out exclusive negotiation scripts, real life case studies, and behind the scenes insights that I really don't share anywhere else. So join thousands of leaders that get the Adopting a Negotiator Mindset newsletter for free every week. And if you want to sign up, go to negotiationlove.com. I'd love to see you there. And always remember that negotiation is more than a skill, it's a mindset. Until next time.